And after hearing so much about the recent progress in East Asia, the next four speakers will talk about the challenges ranging from social, economic to political issues. So let me first introduce the speakers first. First, we have Dr. Daphne Ma, the Director of Asian Energy Studies Center, and also the Associate Professor of Geography at Hong Kong Baptist University. Her research focuses on social aspects of smart energy transitions in East Asia, and she's also a co-founding editor of the Journal of Asian Energy Studies. And we also have Ms. Gahee Han, the researcher at Solutions for Our Climate in South Korea. Her recent project involves a resource planning analysis for the country's power system, and she also previously worked at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. And we also have another researcher from the Solutions for Our Climate, that is Ms. Seukyoung Lee. Ms. Lee's research focus is mainly on coal power, and then her recent work includes projects on domestic and international coal phase-out policies. And last but not least, we also have Professor Jusen Asuka. He is the professor of Center for Northeast Asian Studies at Tohoku University, Japan. He previously worked for the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, and he is recently promoting the green recovery and energy transition, which Japan is lagging behind some other countries. So now first we will have Dr. Daphne Ma to share with us on the situation in Hong Kong.
Thanks for the very kind introduction. Now, let me share my screen first. Okay. Yeah. Okay, thanks again for inviting me to make this presentation on just energy transition in Hong Kong from the theoretical perspectives. And our research team, we focus actually more on energy transitions in Asia, with a focus on social engagement. So actually, I don't have an expertise on energy justice at all. But as a team that has been working in Hong Kong, we do see that energy justice issues are here in Hong Kong, and these are issues that have been very close to our heart. So with that, I appreciate very much this opportunity to make some small contribution to today's discussion from a theoretical perspective. In this presentation, I plan to firstly identify key theoretical concepts concerning just energy transitions. And secondly, I will try to connect these theoretical concepts and the Hong Kong situation. And lastly, I would discuss some of these policy implications. I think after all, it's important for us to have some thoughts on how we can make sense out of energy justice in the real-life context of Hong Kong. The first concept that I'd like to share with you is the concept of citizen-centered energy transitions. I noticed from Dr. Chow's presentation just now that the new net zero roadmap in Taiwan also touch upon the citizen elements in those transitions. Now, as you can see from this table on the left-hand side, that our existing or conventional energy system are not sustainable in many important aspects. So it's a consensus that we need to transform the existing fossil fuel-based and centralized energy system to a more sustainable one. And these changes would take place in at least three important aspects. Firstly, in terms of the fuel energy mix, then we need to use more renewable energy in a more decentralized system. And in terms of market conditions, just now, Ms. Mika mentioned that the incumbent utilities the role in renewable energy. Then indeed, we need market environments which could accommodate or welcome more market players, and that could enhance competitions. And in terms of stakeholder relationships, particularly the relationship between power companies and consumers, that is you and me, then we see that the more sustainable energy system, we need a new multi-directional relationship between power companies and end users. That in particular, that power electricity consumers, we can produce solar on our rooftop, then we can sell solar electricity to the power company. So we foresee that these changes are very much needed. And so no surprise that energy transitions has to be a very long-term process that involves the co-development of social aspect and technological advancement. And then this process has to be citizen-centric. That in a way that is important for us to notice that electricity consumers, we need to be the key change agents. And because our consumption behavior, as well as our technological preferences, will define or drive the business sector and policy changes in an important way. The second concept that I would like to share is about energy justice. This is the social dimension of energy transitions, but unfortunately, it is often the aspect that has been overlooked. And it constitutes to the basic rights and entitlements of a sufficient and helpful everyday life. So that is important aspect of energy transitions. And it is often very difficult to deal with when we work on energy justice. It's because it addresses values or conflict-laden ethical issues. So things are not straightforward. We're talking about values, we're talking about judgment, okay? And then specific issues include equitable access to energy, and it could also about fair distribution of costs and benefits, and it can be about the right to participate in choosing whether and how our energy system will change. So difficult choices have to be made, and then we have to make choices about what kind of energy system we want to have, where to build them, and how to distribute the benefits, the cost, as well as the risk. So by definition, energy justice refers to a global energy system that can fairly disseminate both the benefits and costs of energy services, and that is one that can be representative and can allow impartial energy decision making. Okay. So with that understanding in mind, we can see that energy injustice already exists in Hong Kong. Now, I just put down a couple of examples. We can see the issue of intra-generation inequity in relation to nuclear waste in Hong Kong. For those who are from Hong Kong, you know that we have been importing nuclear electricity across the border from Hong Kong to Hong Kong, from Guangdong to Hong Kong. And the second inequity issue is about intergeneration inequity issue about nuclear waste. Apart from nuclear, in general, energy poverty issue associated with poor households in Hong Kong is also very visible. Now, the third concept that I'd like to share is about distributed and procedural justice. In the literature of energy justice, scholars make a very important distinction between the outcomes and process dimensions of energy justice. For distributive justice, is more concerned about the outcomes. So basically, it's about who gets what in energy transitions. Rights and liberties, powers and opportunities, income and wealth should be distributed in an equitable manner. Okay, there are some testing indicators for us to take stock whether we have distributed justice or not. For example, for instance, whether energy transitions benefit those who are least advantageous. So probably not those, not only the middle income classes. We have to take care of the impact on the least advantaged, underprivileged group of people in the society. Another important testing indicator is that whether those transitions will lead to uneven distributional outcomes resulted from characteristics such as age and disability. Okay. Then in terms of procedural justice, while distributive justice is about the outcome dimension, procedural justice is about the process, including critically those process which unequal outcomes, distributional outcomes can be resulted. Those processes very often are related to the lack of cultural respect, lack of involvement and influence in decision making. Now, in the Hong Kong context, we can see that distributive injustice is noticeable, particularly that we can see that climate impact has worsened the living conditions of many poor families. In a study conducted by Sarah Fuller, who was a scholar at City University and other local university, she visited households in public housing estate in Shakib May, that she found that nearly 50% of the flats surveyed up there have an indoor temperature that was not comfortable, around 30 degrees Celsius. But in those cases, people did not have access to air conditioning, or they simply chose not to turn on their air conditioning because the electricity price is too high. Now, in terms of procedural justice, here is another study conducted by one of my students, and we managed to publish it in a journal, that she found that those poor families living in subdivided flats in Hong Kong, a very tiny apartment in Hong Kong, that they kind of suffer from a situation that their meter actually was not properly installed. They were installed by the landlord rather than instead of installed by the power company. So those unauthorized meters can be problematic because the meter readings could not be very accurate. So that may come up with the issue of overcharging. Then the point I want to make is that how far or to what extent those households can bargain with the landlord, or can get in touch with the power company to get the meters properly installed. So these are key procedural injustice issue in Hong Kong. Now, the last concept that I would like to share with you is that is a multi-dimensional framework for energy poverty. As academics, we like framework very much because it is a very useful analytical tools for us to conceptualize the key elements or linkages of elements or components of important social phenomenon that we are studying. Now, this is the study that my student did, as that the one I just referred to. She found that she used this integrated framework to conceptualize a set of vulnerability factors that households have to responses in to energy poverty challenges, and these responses have resulted in impacts on the health, education, family relationships, social respect, and dignity aspect of these households. Okay, and the key finding from her study is that actually households, they fall into hidden energy poverty. Okay, on the surface, it seems that everyone seems to be okay with the traditional expenditure-based indicator, meaning that those survey households, actually they did not use up 10% of their income expenditure on electricity. They used less than 10%. But in effect, in their real life living environment, they actually suffer quite a lot. Okay, so this is how my student captured the phenomenon of hidden energy poverty with this framework. Okay, now to conclude, I want to have some quick discussion of the policy implications of this wider awareness of energy justice concepts. We find that these theoretical concepts are useful because they can allow us to better understand, predict, and manage what to bring about, how to bring about positive and desirable outcomes of energy transitions. And this understanding, theoretical understanding, can help us to inform policy making with a better understanding of the scale of the problems and their occurrence and how things work or do not work, the mechanisms. We can help policymakers to make more informed policy decisions. And with that, we can formulate better policies that can enable just energy transitions. Now, specifically, say, for instance, for distributional justice, when we think about how we can better develop renewable energy in Hong Kong, I think the direction could be that we place more focus on citizen-based renewable energy. So solar is for everyone, rather than limited to those who have a rooftop, okay, which is pretty much the situation right now in Hong Kong. In Taiwan, I'm aware that there are much more extensive development of citizen solar projects in which citizens, they can chip in a small amount of money and can take part in those citizen solar projects. In terms of procedural justice, I think we need to think more about how we can invite citizens to participate in decision makings, have much better access to energy information. Okay, so I think this I'd like to end this sharing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ma, for introducing the key frameworks and also giving us a very detailed picture of the situation in Hong Kong. And next, we will have Ms. Gahee Han to talk about the problems of power market in South Korea.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. Let me share my screen now. And thank you very much for inviting me to speak here today. I'm Gahee Han from Solutions for Climate. We are a climate advocacy think tank campaign group based in Seoul, South Korea. I'm in the renewable team focused on power market and grid issues. Today, I'm going to present how South Korea's outdated power market system acts as a key obstacle to renewables in Korea. Let me briefly introduce how Korea's power market system is vertically integrated and dominated by a state-owned utility called Korea Electric Power Corporation, also known as KEPCO. KEPCO owns 100% of transmission and distribution network, and it is a solar electricity retailer in South Korea. At the same time, its subsidiaries produce 70% of total national electricity. While retaining this outdated power market structure, which can limit a fair access to the grid, Korea announced an ambitious target for renewables. In October 2021, the South Korean government announced and updates its 2030 national greenhouse gas reduction goal. The updated NDC projected a reduction of 40% below 2018 emissions level by 2030. And the national plan also included a following composition of the power mix to achieve. It shows Korea needs to increase renewables 5-fold the current proportion by 2030. However, limitations and misguided market structures are restricting the potential of renewables in South Korea. Jeju Island is a prominent example of such a contradiction. In 2012, they announced their carbon-free island initiative. According to this plan, Jeju plans to expand renewable energy up to around 1,400 megawatt of solar power and 2,300 megawatt of wind power, expecting to arrive at more than 100% new and renewable supplies in the island. Renewables in Jeju have undertaken an impressive development in the past few years. As of 2021, Jeju has established about 500 megawatts of solar PV and 300 megawatt of wind turbines. These are primarily owned by private companies. These solar and wind together occupies about 18% of the power mix now, some distance from becoming the majority power source for Jeju, but Jeju already has been experiencing a dramatic curtailment in renewable generation. This is because Jeju still has about 900 megawatts, like majority of gas or oil power plants on the grid. These are owned by KEPCO, and of which 300 megawatts of gas and oil power plants considered must-run power plants, meaning that to maintain the power system stability, this amount of fossil fuel plants must run. So system reliability is the reason presented here for must-run plants that eventually lead to renewable curtailments. However, keeping only fossil fuel must-run plants is not the only one technical option that can ensure reliability. By adopting necessary infrastructure such as batteries, synchronous condenser, and virtual power plants, we can make the grid more flexible, so to accommodate more volatile renewable energy, while also ensuring reliable supply of energy without such high reliance on fossil fuels. But these technologies are not being widely introduced yet because pricing mechanism available for balancing services is not fair. KPX paid significant capacity payments to fossil fuels to ensure that these power plants are ready for dispatch. But only 1/4 of the capacity payment is provided to battery system compared to gas power plants, and no capacity payment is given to virtual power plants, even if they play the same role in terms of power supply. Then who makes these market rules and who's the decision maker on technology investments in Korea? Technically, it's KPX. The decision on pricing mechanism, the amount of must-run fossil fuel plants, and the amount of renewable curtailments, all is made by KPX, which is Korea's national grid system operator, and which should be independent and neutral to technologies. But instead of bringing in these technologies actively to the grid, KPX has been increasingly implementing renewable curtailments, as you can see in the table. Just in the first half of 2021, wind turbines were restricted a total of 55 times from generating, almost 3% of total generation. This is mainly because KPX struggles to be an independent system operator from its relationship with KEPCO. KPX is in the difficult decision-making position, considering 3 out of the 11 board members of KPX is from KEPCO or KEPCO's subsidiaries, and that KEPCO holds over 99% of KPX member meeting voting rights. No wonder KEPCO did not be so happy to see actively introduced batteries and renewable energies, which will probably contribute to the decline in its own gas or oil power generation in Jeju Island. So in summary, it is key to understand that in South Korea, vertically integrated power market structure dominated by KEPCO can undermine renewable access to the grid. KEPCO, the state-owned utility, own transmission distribution network and generating or selling electricity at the same time, with even having majority of voting rights and substantial presence in the system operator KPX program. So there seems to be a high possibility that it obstructs competitors' access to infrastructure. And this will eventually hinder fair competition in the market and lead to higher curtailment for renewables, which can also disable the country to meet their NDC targets. So this is conclusion for today, like suggestions from my side to accommodate 30% renewables by 2030 and eventually carbon neutrality by 2050. South Korea needs to accelerate the power system transformation in a way to make the system more flexible and reliable to accommodate variable renewable energy. Also, South Korea needs to increase independence of a system operator by unbundling the system for KPX to neutrally evaluate to reduce the amount of must-run fossil fuel plants and curtailment of renewables. And ambitiously roll out infrastructure technologies such as ESS, energy storage, synchronous condensers, and virtual power plants. I think, yeah, that's it from me today. And again, thank you for having me today. Yeah, thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Han. And now we will have your co-worker, Ms. Seukyoung Lee, to tell us about the coal retirement mechanism in South Korea.
Thank you, Ingrid, for the introduction. Let me quickly share my slides. Can everyone see okay? Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Seukyoung. I am a researcher at Solutions for Our Climate. And today I will give you an overview of the coal power generation and its issues in South Korea, and also introduce the different approaches we are taking to phase out coal from our power system. South Korea's dependence on coal is still really high at 34% of our power mix. And even though we did announce our first phase out year at COP26 last year, it was a very disappointing 2050. So we are campaigning to bring that forward to 2030 level. We currently have 57 units in operation. And in addition to that, we have 2 plants that are currently under construction. The table on the right-hand side here shows the more detailed information of the new plants under construction. Gangneung is scheduled to come online next year, and Samcheok the year after in 2024. These 2 plants are privately funded, which sets them apart from most of our operating plants that are KEPCO owned. KEPCO, like Gahee explained in her previous talk, is our majority state-owned utility. We do not have any more plants in the pipeline after these 2 plants. So we have highly organized and consistent campaigns to stop the construction of these 2 new plants. But this year, we're also adding a slightly different angle of an approach because South Korean government and businesses are increasingly recognizing the need for a coal phase out, but they lack the confidence to commit to a 2030 phase out. They are having trouble visualizing how to execute that. And a big part of that is that our government believes that early phase out would entail having to compensate a significant amount of money to the plant owners. Our legislators have set down the basis to start talking about how to source these compensation funds. But since then, they have not taken any meaningful actions to calculate how much that would be. So we have a bit of a blockage in our coal phase out discussion, where we have a situation where most of the discourse is centered around compensation issue. And even though the compensation discussion has been around for a while, there has not been any real progress to figure out what we need to make an accelerated coal phase out possible. So this year, SFOC is doing the calculations that the government should have done. But this is not to say that we want to encourage the idea of compensating the plant owners. The purpose of this is more to present practical numbers so we can facilitate and help coal phase out discussions move forward. The approach we are taking is a type of coal retirement mechanism. And coal retirement mechanism is an umbrella term that refers to various forms of financial tools and programs that are designed to shut down coal assets ahead of their original scheduled closure dates. Examples include Asian Development Bank's Energy Transition Mechanism. Here they acquire coal plants and shut them down before their original scheduled dates. And another type is the reverse auctions that Germany has been doing. And in this system, plant owners enter competitive auctions, and whoever submits the lowest amount of compensation wins the bid. Of course, both of these mechanisms have their own weaknesses and shortcomings. So we are not suggesting that we directly adopt such models in the same exact ways. But I am sharing these examples more to help explain the concept. SFOC is currently developing a guide mechanism to demonstrate to our government how a 2030 or 2035 phase out can be implemented. So how it works is that, say this line here is the return that the plant owners had expected to get under current policy environment. But emissions regulations always have to continue to increase. So as time goes by, the returns would actually decrease and resemble something closer to this line over here. What that means, in other words, is that the longer these plant owners hold on to these assets, they would be exposed to greater uncertainties and risks in the future, because emissions regulations increasing would mean that coal plants would have to adjust accordingly and decrease their capacity factors. But if plant owners commit to an earlier phase out, 2030 or earlier, then the government can refer to the cash flow between the earlier phase out date and the normal operations years that the plant owners had expected, and use that numbers to help secure that cash flow for the plant owners. Of course, this graph here represents something closer to the business perspective. So the government would have to implement supplementary policies to drive down the cost and decrease this area over here. We believe this would be an effective way to bring the government and the businesses back to the discussion table, because it has elements that would be of interest to both parties. here I brought a preliminary results for the two new plants that are currently under construction that we discussed in the previous slides. What these numbers do is that they show us the maximum amount we would need to close these plants by 2035 in this case. We do have numbers for 2030 as well. And with this information, since the government can now clearly see the cap level for the funds needed, it would be easier for the government to then figure out a way to lower those costs from that level. Of course, to ensure that these mechanisms can fully function to their full capacities, or to their full performance expected, it is imperative that the reduced coal power capacity is not replaced with other fossil fuels such as gas or ammonia co-firing. And also, unless the emissions regulations do continue to go up, the plant owners would not be incentivized to participate in the mechanism. So we must make sure that we keep making progress in that arena. And transparency in the discussion and negotiation procedures are of course imperative. And also we must ensure that workers' rights and regional economy issues are made part of the discussion, so the decision made are not just between the government and the plant owners. With this concept, we plan to engage with all the relevant stakeholders and decision makers throughout the year, so that hopefully by around next year, the Korean government can start to think about designing their own mechanism for early retirement. That's it from me for today, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lee. And I think we have learned a lot from South Korea today. And finally, we have Professor Asuka to share with us on the dynamics of just energy transition between China, Japan, and South Korea.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The title given to me was Dynamics of Just Energy Transition Among China, Japan, and South Korea. It's, I think, too much for 10 minutes. So today I'm going to focus more on Japan, but also I'm trying to touch upon a little bit on China and South Korea. And I'm working for Tohoku University, and I'm doing research on environmental economics and politics. So today I'm going to talk more on the perspective, from the perspective on politics and economics. So I will give you some numbers about energy transition or just transition in Japan and China and Korea. Talking about just transition, it's true that the just transition is not so easy for several countries. This is the graph made by CSO Equity Review. This is the kind of association of the NGO in the world. And this axis shows how much the people are working for coal industry and the percentage of total employment. And this axis is GDP per capita. So these countries are very rich and they have some alternatives for the people working for coal industry. But here, for example, in China, 3 million people are working for coal industry, and they may not have so much options to have some just transition. So that is the reality of the world. And this is about coal power transition ranking made by E3G, another European NGOs, think tank. And coal transition progress ranking in EU 28 countries, in total 44 countries. Japan's ranking is the last. So it's quite easy to see how Japanese energy transition is lagging behind other OECD and EU 28 countries. This is about the proportion of the renewable electricity from 1990 to 2020, how much each country developed renewable energy electricity in past 30 years. And again, you can see Japan is lagging behind other countries. Actually, in 1990, the proportion of the electricity, renewable electricity was not that small compared to as a developed country, but after 30 years, Japan's didn't do homework, so they are lagging behind other European countries like Denmark, Australia, Canada, Norway. This is the reason the Japan is lagging behind is we have already discussed, and Mika-san, Obai-san has already explained the situation in Japan. The vested interest in Japan is very, very strong, and it's very difficult to change the policy overnight. And we have to make good argument about alternatives to the current energy mix by the current conservative Japanese government. So last year we published so-called report 2030 with my colleagues who is working on energy mix and energy model for many years. Then maybe some of you know there's a report 2035, which was made by the professor of University of California, Berkeley, which is supporting the Biden administration's energy environmental policy. So we use the names instead of 2035, we put the name 2030. So report 2030. And this report is quite comprehensive report showing how much we need, what kind of policy we need, and what is the impact on economics, and how much for example, job creation we can get, and how much PM 2.5 premature deaths will be avoided. Those kind of number we put in this report. And in 2030 energy mix scenario, as an alternative to our governmental energy mix, we set a no nuclear power plant and no coal-fired power plant in 2030. According to governmental energy mix, their energy mix is we still have a lot of coal-fired power plant in 2030, and we still have a lot of nuclear power plant in 2030. But according to our green recovery scenario, green recovery strategy is a name for our energy mix. We assume will be no coal-fired power plant and no nuclear power plant in 2030. Of course, to do so, we need more investment on energy efficiency, energy conservation, and renewable energy. But according to our calculation, investment for the energy transition strategy is less than reduction of the utility expenses that make very good economical rationale for our energy transition in Japan. So these kind of numbers are calculated by me and my colleagues, and there are many similar calculations done by think tank or government. And I understand the Korean government also try to calculate this kind of number. And of course, there are many calculations in the state. And as a result of our calculation, positive impact of green recovery strategy, which is alternative to our governmental current energy mix, investment accumulate total of 202 trillion yen by 2030, and economic effect to 205 trillion yen by 2030, increase from official GDP estimate. And job creation, if we know the number of investment, we can calculate how much job creation using so-called input-output table. And according to the calculation, we will have about 2.54 million jobs per year, which last about 10 years. And energy cost reduction is 358 trillion yen by 2030. Other positive impact by our green recovery strategy is fossil fuel import reduction would be 51.7 trillion yen. At this moment, we are importing almost all fossil fuel, but we can reduce this kind of amount a lot. And CO2 emission, according to the government, current governmental target for 2030 is 40% compared to 1990 level. So our CO2 emission target is 15% more aggressive or more ambitious compared to governmental target at this moment. And in 2050, 93% reduction can be achieved using current existing technology. So we don't need to depend on CCS or ammonia hydrogenation so much. Of course, we need some about 10% to for those kind of new technology, but 93% we can reduce CO2 emission with current existing commercially viable technology. That is our result of the calculation. Air pollution deaths avoided would be 220 deaths per year. And so let me talk about what will happen to job employment in Japan. Nuclear power and big CO2 emitters in Japan, employment and GDP contribution is not that big against the kind of intuition by many people in Japan. Employment of nuclear industry is about 50,000. Employment of the coal power station is about 3,000. It's quite small compared to like China or other countries. And GDP contribution is 0.04%. Employment of the 6 major CO2 emitting industry, power, iron, steel, cement, chemicals, those 6 big emitters is about 150,000. And GDP contribution is less than 1%. Current employment of the renewable energy industry in Japan is about 280,000, according to IRENA 2021 statistics. So if we compare current situation in Japan, the renewable energy employment is much bigger than, quite bigger than the current employment by coal power plant or nuclear industries. And this is the figure which will show how much will be job creation in 2030 and 2050, and what is the current job numbers by 6 major emitters. So as I mentioned in previous slide, there will be 2.54 million new employment will be created by our green recovery strategy for 10 years. Then we have to, it's quite natural to compare this 2.54 million job creation to this 200,000 job currently made by big emitters and nuclear power plant. So of course it's very difficult to compare this kind of number. Some people may argue that this number is just calculated using input-out table, and this number is current existing number of people. So there are many arguments, but we think this kind of number can be triggered to start the discussion among stakeholders in Japan. And this is another kind of twist in Japanese argument on just transition, energy transition. As you know, Chinese company are dominating the global market in many areas, including technology, renewable energy, and energy efficiency. And for example, this shows that blue line is Chinese industry, Chinese companies, and red line is US companies. So this shows the total market share of the world in the world. And you can see that Chinese companies, Chinese industry are dominating the world market in terms of solar module, battery cells, EV, and wind turbine. And I think the situation of Japanese industry is the same. By the way, this graph is made by US Council on Economic Advisor to President. So this is governmental from US governmental papers. So there's big concern in the United States and in Japan as well, how much Chinese company dominates dominates the field of renewable energy as well. So let me conclude my presentation. Current Japanese government is not so positive on energy transition, and that's why we the last rank in the ranking of called transition ranking is we are the last, and the people who are dominating the energy system in Japan want to continue the status quo as long as possible. So it's not so easy. Many people in Japan still believe coal power and nuclear cheap and necessary for Japanese economy. In reality, the renewable energy is a bit expensive compared to international price in, for example, the solar power and wind power. Of course, it will be cheaper in the future, in the near future, in Japan, but compared to other countries like China or US, the Japanese renewable energy is still expensive. That is the kind of hurdle for Japan to transfer to new economy. Government and industry and doubling down on hydrogen, ammonia, and CCUS. According to the think tank called Transition Zero, the Japanese government and Korean government, those are two governments which support hydrogen and ammonia for power generation. Only two countries in the world or in developed country promote hydrogen and ammonia. That is China, and that is Korea and Japan. And the reason why they still promote these hydrogen ammonia is there are two, I guess. Number one is they want to continue the status quo and they want to continue the power system as long as possible. And number two would be because, as I mentioned, the renewable energy is kind of technologically dominated by Chinese industry, so they want to do something different from that may be the one of the big reasons why government in Japan and Korea promote hydrogen ammonia. And materials to discuss the energy transition is getting ready even in Japan. Material shows means, for example, how much investment we needed in each area and how much job creation will be created in each year. Those kind of number given or made by our research institute, research group, and other NGO think tank are going to make the same kind of numbers and make good argument for just transition in Japan. So it's happening. And communication with the labor union needed. Even if we submitted this kind of number to stakeholders, we haven't had good communication or conversation with the labor union yet. They understand they should do something, but at this moment, it's not so easy, and current conservative government are not too don't want to talk so much about this kind of delicate issue. So this year, I hope we can start communication with labor union on about just transition with very specific numbers. Thank you very much. That's all for my presentation today.
Thank you very much, Professor Asuka. And let's move on to the question and answer session. I already see some questions in the Q&A box. The first question is for all speakers. To accelerate energy transition, is nuclear an option since it may still take some time to develop renewable energy like nowadays? See, any one of you would like to briefly answer this question?
Or maybe let me take this question. And I think my sense is that it's more promising than what these participants just suggest. I think for renewable energy and energy efficiency and energy saving, there still really quite a lot that we can do. And then that will help us to reduce the use of nuclear if that is policy direction that to phase out nuclear is the policy direction for a country or for a city. Say, for example, in the case in Hong Kong, I think for renewable energy, both locally produced solar, for example, I think Kevin Lee just mentioned that there are some studies suggesting that Hong Kong we can produce more solar, and cross-border renewable market is quite promising, I think, at this for our region. And energy saving, I think the experience from Japan after Fukushima, it shows that if there is political commitments and there are social acceptance, we felt the urgency to do much better on energy saving and energy efficiency, then actually it can be done in a very short term with visible impact. So this is my short answer to this participant. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ma. Another question for you is that could you please elaborate how cultural respect is related to the procedural justice in Hong Kong?
Yeah, I just have some thought about that. I think my first feeling is that in Hong Kong, we don't really have the energy culture in a very clear way, because I think first thing is that electricity price has been very cheap in Hong Kong, and electricity in Hong Kong is very invisible. So for most people, that electricity, we cannot really see the electricity, and then because the price is so cheap, then if I do good on energy saving, I can't see the big impact on my electricity bill. So everything is very invisible. So the cultural thing on energy is very weak or invisible in Hong Kong. And also, I think in terms of information, energy is a very difficult subject to work on, because many energy issues are very data intensive, and how we can make good use of the data and translate it in layman terms is very difficult. But that is a very important part of the energy literacy, because it changed the culture, it changed the awareness. So I think in short, my quick response is that it makes enhancing procedural justice in Hong Kong particularly challenging, because the energy culture in this city is very weak, I would say. No.
Thank you, Dr. Ma. And actually, since I see one more question for you, but we're actually running out of time. Is it possible for you to type your answers there so that we can save some time for this question? And also, we have some other questions also to all speakers. In terms of the policies currently in Asia to achieve a just energy transition, do they usually focus on the rights of workers, or are there policies that also focus on the impact on communities? Do you have anything in mind that you can answer? If there's okay.
Yes, okay. Can I start? Can I talk?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Again, it's because previous speaker talked about the compensation. So how much government is ready to pay is very difficult problem, I would say. And then some people say market mechanism or capitalism doesn't need to provide any money for the company. That's one way of thinking. But of course, in case of climate crisis, we have to speed up the transition. So we have to provide some money for company. But as I said, in Japan, we haven't studied that kind of conversation yet. So I hope this year and next year, we will focus more on what specifically we need from the governmental perspective and stakeholders perspective. That's all for me.
Okay, thank you, Professor Asuka. And I will take one last question from Seukyoung. It's also for all speakers. The current RE technologies require large area to install reasonable capacity. Are the densely populated cities or countries have adequate land reserves to build up the necessary capacities required for the transition? See if anyone wants to answer this question.
Again, I can talk about Japan. At this
Sure.
moment, and the 10%, only 10% of the rooftop of the Japanese house is with solar power. It's only 10%. So we can increase the rooftop solar power much more in Japan. And also we have a lot of potential for solar sharing. So in that sense, I think we calculated and we have a lot of potential even for 2030 without no nuclear and no coal-fired power plant with good supply of the renewable power generation without any blackout, and also it's cheap. So that is the conclusion of our research.
Thank you, Professor Asuka. I still see so many other questions, but we are running out of time. I hope the speakers, maybe you can spend some time typing your answers in the Q&A box so that they can also get your insights later. And now, before we move on to the next session, we will take a 5 minutes break. So I will see you in 5 minutes. Thank you very much for today's speakers. Thank you, Dr. Ma. Thank you, Professor Asuka and Ms. Han, also Ms. Lee.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.